My last video got pretty viral on TikTok where I talked about racism in China and how the government policy made it worse. So naturally, a lot of China stans asked me this. If you keep saying China did everything wrong, how come it's so peaceful? Internally and externally, no ethnic conflict, no foreign wars. How do you explain that? Good question. Let me first talk about the internal peace. It's true we don't see a lot of regional or ethnic conflict in China, but let me tell you, that's only because China is kicking the can down the road. I can't imagine what will happen when that can reaches a dead end. China has a very effective system to segregate groups with different cultural identities and different income brackets. It's called the hukou system. I don't want to bore those of you who already heard my explanations before, but in a nutshell, it's a system that prevents large-scale migration from poor areas to rich areas. If you want to bring your whole family to a different province or different city, there are a lot of administrative fire hoops you have to jump through. Just finding a normal job is not enough. And even if you give birth to a child in a rich city, as long as your formal residence is not in that city, your child cannot go to school there. That's why 60 million Chinese children have to live away from their parents. So that means even though individual movement within the country is not too hard, it's very hard to form a full-fledged migrant community that speaks a different dialect and practices a different culture from the locals. And of course, a lot of people, including a lot of Americans, see that as a good thing because it helps avoid direct community-based conflict. But the human cost of that system is enormous. Of course, children who spend their childhood away from their parents are very, very unhappy. And because of the immobility, poverty of an area can be entrenched across generations with no end in sight. Unless, of course, your hometown is lucky enough to get on the government's list of priorities. But you can't count on it. That's what I mean by kicking the can down the road. You can reduce the short-term tension by segregating people, but then you build up the long-term tension by keeping the income gap large between regions and groups for generations. For rich neighborhoods in rich cities, poverty is like out of sight and therefore out of mind. And vice versa. For poor communities, rich people are also out of sight and out of mind. Maybe it makes psychological sense, but it won't work in the long run. People outside China tend to overestimate the cultural cohesion of the Chinese population. They're like, look, 90% of them are Han Chinese who speak the same language. They're not going to end up in war like Yugoslavia or Chechnya. They're one big family. No. You really think 1.5 billion people can have the same culture? No way. Officially, 90% of China are Han Chinese just because they use the Chinese characters, but they are not the same. If you put me somewhere south of the Yangtze River, I wouldn't understand a word of the local dialect. I would be clueless. Even in the Mandarin areas, the accents are vastly different. Comparatively, English accents are not that different from each other. You may think English in Ireland sounds totally different from English in Texas, right? But an Irish and a Texan won't have any problem understanding each other. But Mandarin accents in Sichuan and Mandarin accents in Shanxi are totally different. A Sichuan native and a Shanxi native won't be able to communicate unless they made an effort to hide their accent. Of course, China's official discourse likes to pretend that there are no separate identities. They don't even allow different accents on TV. Can you believe it? If you make a drama series or a reality show, everyone has to speak the official Mandarin accent. It's required. That's how hard they want to enforce unity. Honestly, that kind of enforcement is highly depressing. If you don't see people who talk like you on TV, That kills a lot of fun, right? And forcing standard Mandarin down people's ears doesn't mean the identities will disappear. People are still aware of their differences, and they're still aware of the taxes they pay to the central government to feed Beijing or whatever cities the party cares about. So one day that resentment will reach a breaking point. It's a matter of time. Of course, the CCP is very good at delaying the conflict. I think their plan is to wait until the United States collapses first, so their future chaos won't look so bad. And at this rate, I think they'll probably succeed. Okay, now let's talk about the external peace. China hasn't been in a war for 47 years. That's impressive, I agree. But have you thought about why? It's not culture, okay? China became so big in the first place exactly because of conquests and expansions. There was nothing in Chinese culture that was particularly against the war. Some people say it was Marxism. They're like, China is not imperialist because it's a Marxist country. Oh my god, can you be real? If you go to China and ask any random person on the street, old, young, rich, poor, male, female, ask any of them if they believe in Marxism. They're gonna laugh in your face. Where are you from, sir? The 70s? Marxism is in the formal documents the same way the King of England is still the head of Canada. It doesn't mean jackass. China will not refrain from a war just because old Carl would be unhappy. If you ask me, the only viable explanation is that strategically, the Chinese leadership is concerned with the consequence of losing a war. China's main rivals on the east, Japan, Taiwan, and South Korea, are all protected by the United States. And even invading a country that's not an US ally will probably strike a nerve and lead to US sanctions, right? Then the Central Asian countries in the north are considered Russia's little brothers, so they're off limit too. I don't think there's any deeper reason for China's restrained foreign policy. It simply fears the consequence. But if one day China replaces the US as a top dog, do you really think it will behave any better than Uncle Sam today? Human beings all have the same weaknesses. They're all bad at handling too much power. Saying some countries are peaceful is actually kind of condescending, as if they were too innocent for violence. Oh, that country is so cute. What I'm trying to say is that China's facade of peace doesn't imply any superiority of its political system or ideology. The internal peace was actually a side effect of oppression, and the external peace was a strategic restraint in the face of stronger rivals. There's nothing mysterious. Most importantly, you can't expect the United States to perform any better by copying the Chinese system. I'm saying this because I've seen too many American TikTokers that sound like China has already found the answer to everything. It's ridiculous. There are political systems that are worth copying, but not the Chinese one.